so much. Now, as world leaders attempt to help control the conflict in Gaza and Israel from spreading into a fully fledged war in the Middle East, the human cost of the airstrikes and ground assaults continues to spiral.
Well, just last week, terrorist group Hamas targeted a music festival in Israel where thousands of young people had convened. The militants opened fire, killing hundreds, and while some managed to escape, some other festival goers were kidnapped. Well, we're joined now by Elliot Sorene, whose son was at the festival and managed to escape. Elliot, can you take us, if you can, back to 10 days ago? What happened with your son?
My son was at the music festival, along with a number of his friends. Rockets started, he saw rockets in the air. My son had the foresight to realise that the music festival would be stopped. Him and his friends packed up, it's a bit like a Glastonbury thing, packed up their tent and walked towards the car. Once they got to the cars, the music had stopped. The cars came under heavy fire. The terrorists were using Kalashnikovs, M16s. Some of them were on trucks firing large Browning machine guns and just killing everyone they saw. The terrorists also trying to take hostages. My son had the foresight to leave the car and escape by foot. And they were hunted down. As they were running, he saw people drop by the side of him, young teenage girls being shot in the head. He kept on running, and my son, thankfully, survived. My son is well. I buried a friend yesterday here in London who did not make it, was killed in the same terror attack. A terror attack on totally unarmed civilians at a music festival. A terror attack when 3,000 terrorists crossed an international border with only one aim: to kill everything they saw, whether it be men, women, children. And needless to say, 20% of Israel are Arabs and Muslims. Many Muslims died in this attack. This is not some religious issue here. I realise people in the West become very confused about this. They think it's like a Rangers-Celtic football match. It is not. There are not two sides. I realise people in the West look at conflicts as a spectator sport, but these terror groups, needless to say, kill more Muslims than anyone else. If someone supports Muslims, they would be against Islamist terror groups. And yes, I do know of many of the dead. I know of a Muslim doctor colleague of mine who was killed, a Muslim policeman, and many, many Jews. Over 1,000 civilians killed on that day.
1,000. Elliot, thank you so much for coming in. And we, as a station, we broke that news and like the rest of the country and the world, recoiled in horror. I understand where you come from when you say a spectator thought, but we must talk about the human tragedy. As a father, what was the first thing you heard? Did he ring you and say this is happening? Did you see it on the news? I mean, the concern, the worry, the fear, palpable.
Well, yes, I mean, I heard about what was going on the news, and I actually FaceTimed my son, and he was actually running in the field, and I had he was talking incoherently and just said, I can't talk. Only later did I realise that I'd actually spoken to him while he was being hunted down and running. He ran to 15 kilometres.
How is he?
He's all right, yeah, he's coping. He's been to the funeral of one of his friends who was killed. He's got 2 friends in hospital from this attack, but he's dealing with it.
I really wanted to. This is fascinating, but / appalling. I was very vocal 10 days ago about, and you said it, terrorists going in across an international border and murdering people, and the right response of the world was to recoil in horror. What we see now, Biden's flying in today, that horrible story overnight at the hospital in Gaza with 500 people being killed. I get where the Israelis are coming from when they say this is appalling. We need to avenge this. We need to get our hostages back. This takes us back 70 years. I'd like to think, and I believe I can say this to you, that Hamas, being a terrorist group, does not represent what many, 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 many millions of Palestinians feel. But what is your fear in terms of what comes next? Because what's unfolding is terrifying, Elliot.
Unfortunately, Hamas, in polls, does have the vast majority of Palestinians in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem. Polls very high. did very well in the last democratic elections they have had, is an extremely popular, whilst it is a terror group, and whilst it's important to say that Hamas does not have territorial nationalistic aspirations. This is an Islamist group which deems its aim is to exterminate those it believes to be non-believers. Needless to say, most of the people it kills are in fact other Muslims, but it is not a nationalistic organisation. It is a prescribed terror group, also in the United Kingdom. It is regrettable that between 10 and 20% of the rockets they fire do not leave the Gaza Strip and do land on Gazans. This is on purpose, to up the death count. There are no shelters in Gaza for civilians. There are only shelters for Hamas terrorists. They have an underground network.
What's your response to that bomb last night? Already the blame game. Nick and I were talking about this earlier. The Israelis say it wasn't us. The Gazans say it. Well, Hamas says it was. What's your view?
Well, there is clear evidence that this, it would appear, is from Islamic Jihad, another terror group whose base is in the Islamist regime in Iran. The rockets misfired, landed short. It's important to understand this conflict has a very low collateral. You're talking, in the broad schemes of the Middle East, we're talking about 60,000 deaths in 100 years. You can compare that to, on both sides, whether they be Israelis, Palestinians, Egyptians, Syrians. Every war in the last 100 years, about 60,000 deaths. 1 million died in Iraq after 2003. 1 million died in the Iran-Iraq war. 1 million dead in Syria. This is the smallest conflict that's ever happened in the Middle East. However, the world is obsessed with it. Of course, it is regrettable, needless to say. The civilians of Gaza are suffering. The fact they are being led by a terror group. The fact that they are, Israel has the only military that gives SMS text messages, warning and telling them to leave.
There was no warning at the music festival, was there, when your son was there?
There was no, of course not. Listen, it's what's called asymmetrical warfare. Terror groups abide by different rules. They have no rules by definition. And Hamas has to be removed from Gaza.
And what do you think the difference is in the global response to this particular conflict? And that you say it's different to Syrian war, Iraq war, etc. Do you think that society has changed in the way that we reflect, that we've learnt lessons perhaps, or do you think that there is a certain bias involved?
I think there's an obsession with Jews. I think Jews are news. I think it's as simple as that.
Can you expand on that a little bit?
I think 1 million dead in Syria or 1 million dead in Iraq is less interesting to the world.
What's it like to be a Jewish person at the moment in the United Kingdom? Not across the world, but in the United Kingdom. We've heard about anti-Semitic attacks. We've talked about kids not being able to go to school, where their blazers congregate. I have several Jewish friends who say this is a really torrid time. Well, I won't disrespect him, but somebody I know was really emotional yesterday, works here, and he just said, I'm terrified for my family, for my grandmother. I'm getting abuse left, right and centre.
My wife did not send our children to school on Friday. We did have, if you remember, the convoy of cars of anti-Jewish protesters screaming, Haiba, Haiba, Ya Yahudish, Muhammad Sayyid. The chants are calling for the death of Jews. I can speak Arabic, by the way. 20% of Israelis are Arabs, and most Israelis, we come from families who were expelled and ethnically cleansed from Arab countries. So, and I have a great respect for the Arabic language. How do I feel? We feel very unsafe. Listen, Jews, most of us don't assimilate, but we integrate into British society. We're proud British citizens. We're not the only ancient people to live here. We can see our Prime Minister. We can see Greek British people. You can see Armenian British people. We feel very much British. Both of my grandfathers fought for Britain in the Second World War. My grandfather fought in the first commando unit ever in the British Army, commanded by Ord Wingate, who in fact was one of the founding fathers of the Israeli army as well. Listen, we don't feel safe here. We feel a great deal of hatred. We feel much safer since Labour did not win the last election. It has given us a reprieve. We feel much safer. But most Jews would say we see our existence in this country as temporary and that things will change. And we do see shocking ignorance. We see people that have never been to the Middle East, don't speak a word of Arabic, expressing extremist opinions, supporting this terror group, not understanding that it's not a football match. There are more than two sides, and you don't have to support one side and hate the other. You can support both sides or neither side or all the sides, and you can want peace and reconciliation for all.
Elliot, Nick, I could speak
so
for Nick
much.
for a change. I could sit and talk to you all morning.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have to, as a news channel, give
No,
both sides, but we really, really, really appreciate
Really appreciate you coming on.
being
Thank you so much.
Please